Some viewers complained in our original self-defense critique that we were not dressed like Lena Marty in spandex leggings. So now we have the important question, should we go with sleek, athletic black, like in the video, or rainbow butterflies, my personal favorite? This is a tough choice. Alright, so one of the biggest criticisms that we got about the last video we made was that it was a double-blind study, meaning the techniques only failed because both of us knew them. Now, Jessica here has not studied the Marie Claire self-defense video, have you?
No.
She's not familiar with the techniques, so she is going to play the role of the unsuspecting attacker. Now, I have studied this video meticulously over these last few months, and so I'm very familiar with these techniques. Jessica will attack me. I will attempt to fight her off using only the techniques taught in the video. Are you ready?
Yep.
Let's go. Grab my wrist, my other wrist. Okay, ready? Let's go. I knew I should have gone with the rainbow butterflies. Alright, we're going to try the bear hug from behind. Are you ready? Alright, two-handed right self-defense. Here we go. Next scenario, I'm going to be on the bottom. Jessica will have control of my wrists, and let's see if this works. Ooh. Maybe it's not the pants after all. Maybe I just need to train. So as I mentioned, Jessica has not seen the original video yet, so she was not familiar with these self-defense techniques at all. So we're going to film her reaction to the Marie Claire self-defense video. Ready?
Okay, let's do it.
What's up, guys? My name is Lena Marty, here with Rip Fitness to teach you guys a few moves on self-defense. Pin hold. So you want to block. You want to kick him away as you roll.
But he's not attacking her.
Holding. Kind of tuck really fast. Mirror your hand, and you're going to grab underneath them. You're going to rotate, and you're going to bring this hip forward, and you're going to power out this way. Front choke. You want to grab their wrists, and you want to kind of pull down. You want to drive right knee, left knee, whatever you think is stronger, into their stomach. Bear hug. You grab their hands from underneath, you sit into their foot, step out of it, and tuck away.
Do you remember me trying to do that?
Yeah.
Stop the outside attack. So you want to block first, and then you want to strike with the opposite arm. While you're walking home, hold your keys in your hand, just in case you ever get attacked. You can use that as a weapon to get away. So if someone's trying to mug you, that suggestion would be throw your wallet on the floor and run in the opposite direction. So
I think that's the best advice that she's had
when
in
you're
the whole
holding
video.
your pocketbook, hold it on your weaker side so you can strike with your stronger arm when you're being attacked.
Share with your girlfriends.
Alright, so your thoughts about the video?
She didn't, well, the attacker wasn't really moving. It's like, oh my god, I'm coming to get you, and he's staying there. I don't know, I just think that it's better just to train a martial art instead of worrying about certain self-defense moves that might not work.
I absolutely agree with that. Well, hey, thanks so much for participating in the video today.
Thank you for having me.
Alright, we're here at the JX Fight Club in Shanghai, China to do a follow-up video to our scathing critique of the Marie Claire self-defense video, 5 tips every woman should know for self-defense. Now, we got a lot of commentary on that, mostly positive, but a lot of people said that we were doing the techniques wrong. One of the biggest factors was we were wearing the wrong clothing. In the first video, we were wearing gi pants, jiu-jitsu uniforms, and in this one, well, we decided to put the yoga pants on. So, it's definitely gonna work this time. Let's go. This time we're going to spar without any restrictions or limitations, starting from each of these positions that they showed in the self-defense video, simply to demonstrate that fighting is a really dynamic thing. A lot of people asked us, could you please show some alternative techniques to use instead of these ones, and that's problematic. I'm not going to do that because fighting is just way too dynamic to try to put in a little box like that. I mean, as you can see, we've already gone through like 20 different situations in just those 30 seconds. Now, each 30 seconds we're going to switch positions. I started out on top, and now Jordan starts out on top, and we just keep going. And again, it's dynamic. That's why I said at the end of that first video, take a fighting class and learn how to fight, if that's your goal. Now, what we're doing here is quite a bit different than what I would advise for self-defense. In a self-defense situation, the goal should be escape, survive. If you're attacked on the street, especially by a rapist or a mugger, yeah, you know, they're going to have an advantage. They're going to have the element of surprise. They're going to hit you when you don't expect it. They're going to be bigger. They're going to be stronger. They're going to have weapons. They're going to have friends. So, you know, just learning a trick, like how to break a wrist grab or something like that, it's not going to cut it. It's just not. Because fighting is not a series of tricks. It's... how can I put this? It's no more a series of tricks than, say, fitness is going to the gym once in order to magically turn into a bodybuilder. I mean, this is something you have to work at. So, again, you can see all kinds of different techniques going on here. It's a lot of different dynamics, ranging from standing to the ground, to grappling, to striking, to clinching, to striking in the clinch, dirty boxing, jiu-jitsu, etc. And you'll also notice we don't stay in these starting positions very long. I mean, check out this two-handed rape choke. I mean, immediately I just pummeled to the middle. That's a lousy position. I don't know why so much time is wasted in self-defense classes and self-defense videos addressing that situation when it's just not something that you're going to be stuck in for more than 2 seconds unless you're... I don't even know what to say about that. Just pummel to the inside, and if you're not pinned against anything, just move out of it. But again, self-defense situations that I get asked about aren't the kind of thing that you can really train for anyway. Like a lot of people who do come to me for self-defense, they ask me things like, well, what would you do if you were bent over a ledge and we don't really have that surface in the gym? Or what do you do if somebody grabs your hair, but not like they show in these self-defense videos, but when somebody starts like ripping you around, you're on the floor, and yeah, man, it's so much time wasted on this bear hug crap, because if somebody lifts you up off the ground, you're going for a ride anyway. So, man, if you just wrestle for like a minute, just wrestle for a minute, and wrestling isn't just about taking your opponent down and pinning them. I mean, it's the hand fighting, it's the stand-up game. I mean, so much of it is that. It's learning how to stay on your feet when the other guy goes to the ground. It's learning how to control position. But if you just wrestle for a minute, man, you're better off than watching 1,000 self-defense videos. So, here's Jordan again. And you may or may not see some techniques that you might think, oh wow, that might be a good thing, like right there. Jordan was able to hit that switch right there, basic wrestling technique when I had that bear hug position from the back. But again, you're not going to learn how to fight over the internet. I mean, you've got to put in the hours in a gym if you want this stuff to be in your muscle memory at all. One of the biggest criticisms of our first video was that we were doing the wrist grab escape incorrectly. So I would like to point out that in the video, the instructor demonstrates the move 2 different ways, probably unintentionally, which should say something about consistency in training. So actually, I think he had the wrist like this, okay? So she elevated her wrist, and the first time wrapped this around the outside, okay? Here, hold on really tight, like you're a mugger or whatever. And I'm not even sure how she got, maybe like that, or like this. Well, we're gonna, pardon me, Mr. Mugger, I need to go check my phone with that video on it so I can understand how to do this self-defense technique, which should be instinctual. But let's assume it's this, right? And now I'm gonna rotate, and I've just given him my back, and he's gonna strangle me, right? Now let's try it the other way. I've grabbed it this way, elevate, I'm starting to turn. I've also given him my back, okay? I'd just like to point out here, or I'll grab your wrist, start to do the escape. In the original video, this is what happened. The guy just lets go. Every single time, completely compliant. That's why it works in that video. Okay, in reality, if I'm holding on really tight, here, try whatever escape. Again, if we're arm wrestling, it's strength versus strength, and whoever's bigger or stronger wins. Now, another critique I got, let's get really close to the camera, was this. Here, grab my wrist. Was that I didn't show any good alternatives. And I'll tell you why. Because even though I could show you some stuff that works, you know, like a 2-on-1 grip here, right, where I use a double wrist lock to strip that, or, you know, let's back up a little, or, you know, I clinch with them and I use my leg to break that here. Let's back up a little more, right? I'm actually using my shin and my body weight to break that. And all that stuff works. The trouble with that is that you're not going to learn how to fight over the internet. That's why at the end of the last video I said, take a fighting class and learn how to fight if your objective is learn how to fight. Okay, here's Nils from the original video. You might remember him. So I'd like to talk a little bit about how we have this expectation of how a fight's going to look or how a self-defense technique is going to look, and then the brutal reality. The fights are nasty and brutish and not necessarily short, although sometimes they are. There's this new sports league called Combat Karate, you might have heard of it, where they have these karate experts who fight under a very strict set of rules. And the rule set is specifically engineered to showcase karate-specific techniques because they want to see those straight, crisp, clean punches and the high spinning kicks and stuff like that. See, when you take away all the rules or have a loose set of rules like mixed martial arts, we don't often see that stuff. It tends to be a lot of clinching and a lot of changing of levels and dynamics, and so, you know, the crisp, clean, single techniques that we see in the movies, you know, they get lost or drowned out or overshadowed. So Nils was telling me about this perception he has about self-defense and some experiences he's had where, again, people have their little bubbles broken when push comes to shove. Nils, you want to tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, I've never ever seen a fight that looks like in a Karate Kid movie. What I just said is I do not think that every fight goes to the ground, but I think every fight ends up in a mix between punching, kicking, into clinch, into wrestling. It's always a mix and it's always nasty. It's never a clean fight like you see it in the movie.
Oh man,
it never happens.
Absolutely. Even the fights with really strict rules, like boxing, for example. I mean, no combat sport has more strict rules than boxing. You can just punch each other above the belt, but have you ever seen a boxing match where the boxers didn't clinch? No, right? I mean, they box a little bit, and then they clinch. They box and they clinch, and the referee breaks it apart, and he's like, fight, and they get back together, and they box a little bit, then they clinch. Well, why is that? Well, the reality is, if I'm close enough to touch him with my fist, we're also close enough to clinch, right? So...
And it's a human instinct to do that. This is the other thing what I find really interesting. Like, even if you're coming from a background like which is pure traditional striking, once you see them sparring, kind of it always ends up the same way. And it's pretty much what you see in a lot of MMA fights as well. They will just start to clinch.
Yeah, I think it's why a lot of traditional martial artists, myself included, were initially really put off when they saw the UFC. You know, when UFC 1 came out, and we were all expecting to see blood sport live,
That's true.
you know, with flying, spinning kicks and, you know, Bruce Lee moves and stuff, and then it turned out to be rolling on the floor and clinching and hugging, and we were like, boo, boo, kick him in the head. And, you know, I was one of those guys. I spent, you know, my life training how to do fancy spinning kicks, and when I saw that wasn't reality, it hurt. It hurt right here.
There's another thing that we discussed. What I find interesting is that all those martial arts are basically coming, like the Japanese, the Budo, they're all coming from Jiu-Jitsu. There was already a mix of striking, of throwing, all those techniques, and then they got all split into different styles. And then somehow in our head we believe that either you only throw people or you only kick. Reality is, like, if you really go back to the origins of fighting, like the UFC didn't invent that in the 90s. That was already there, but then kind of it all got split into different styles. And in our head, then we just split it, and I guess like the movies, basically they did their part.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like those, all these Eastern martial arts that stemmed from Japanese fighting traditions. I mean, with the samurai, there was Jiu-Jitsu, the unarmed style, and Kenjutsu, the sword style. But it's fascinating to trace the origin of martial arts forms. For example, Taekwondo forms, which were codified in 1953, I believe, were borrowed from Shotokan karate forms, which were borrowed from Kyokushin karate forms, which were borrowed from Jiu-Jitsu. And when we learn forms from these striking styles like Taekwondo and karate, where it all is performed percussively, we think everything is a strike and a block. But so many of those movements can be interpreted as grappling as well. Why? Because a lot of them actually are grappling and originally were. Why? Because, well, originally Jiu-Jitsu was a mixed martial art, if you will, because originally we didn't mixed martial arts, it was just fighting. There's this quote I love, I forget who said it, he was a sword fighting expert, who said, sword fighting, you have to remember, it's not just with the blade. There's a lot of grappling that goes on. There's a lot of wrestling that goes on. There was a famous sword fighter who said something along the lines of, in single rapier combat, the better wrestler almost always wins. And if neither man knows how to wrestle, the stronger man almost always wins. And when I first heard that, I thought, but they have a sword. Why would they wrestle? Well, same reason boxers clinch. If you're close enough to cross blades, you're close enough to grapple.
Yeah, plus I think also like nowadays it's kind of a luxury. Like if we're all honest, then we just all do that as a sport. We do not really have to use that. A lot of those discussions about self-defense, unless you're like in law enforcement or so, basically, if you're honest to yourself, how many times did you really got attacked on the street or so? But like if you're going back to the origins of that sport, at that time they really had to use that. I mean, the world wasn't as peaceful as it was today. So they also didn't have the luxury to say like, well, my style, I can only do this kind of technique. So this is kind of a made-up distinction that I think we have nowadays in martial arts, where we say it's either only striking that I'm doing or only throwing, etc. I think a samurai didn't really care. He just had to survive. But as I said, that was like 200-300 years ago, so the times have changed.
Yeah, and it's really interesting when we talk about traditional martial arts, because a lot of these traditional martial arts are not actually that old. Like I said, Taekwondo, which we call a traditional martial art because you wear a uniform and a belt and it's taught with traditional forms, was codified in 1953. 1953. That wasn't that long ago. And Aikido, I don't remember the exact date on that. I'm thinking like 1930. I don't have the the internet to look that up, but again, it wasn't that long ago. Even judo, the first martial art to use the belt system, that was really codified in the around 1900 or so. So again, these traditional martial arts, not that old. Did we just run out of stuff to talk about? How about that self-defense video, man? Nils, any other comments about that?
To me, the biggest issue with that video is that, like, first of all, what Ramsey already said, that if it's a fight is always nasty. That's one aspect. The other thing, that all those complaints that we didn't do it right, like as people that are practicing martial arts for some time, it was really difficult to understand what she was doing, because martial arts is about using principles, momentum. So if you, for example, like you have a background in Aikido, and you want to tell me that I didn't understand, or we didn't understand how this is done, then you should know, like in Aikido, it's also a question of like, where does the movement come from? Where is she pulling me? Is he pulling me? Is he pushing me when he attacks me? And based on that, I will then make my own move. But if you watch that movie, there was nothing inside. She didn't follow any principles. And that is my other thing with this.
Yeah.
Like as a martial
Zero
artist,
discussion of dynamics.
I was like, what is she doing? A, it doesn't make any sense. It will not work. B, honestly, I do not even think she has any concept of what she was doing. So, like, my criticism is not just that it doesn't work, that it's too complicated, you could make it way easier, but that as a martial artist, I feel a little bit like insulted, because this isn't martial arts.
Yeah, we could show you like the best self-defense video ever. Stuff that is rock solid technique that's been tested in the octagon, tested on the streets, tested wherever by the best martial artists in the world who've won all kinds of championships and awards, or badass street fighters or military personnel or whatever. And it wouldn't do you any good, because you're not going to learn how to fight on the internet. You're not going to learn how to fight watching videos. If you have a context for understanding, if you train, you might gain some additional insight by watching a video like that. But if you are the type of person who is thinking, hey, I'm worried about my personal safety, so I'm going to go to YouTube and look up 5 tips every woman should know to defend herself in case a mugger jumps out and grabs you, if that should ever happen to you, you're going to be in for a rude awakening. Now, if you are too lazy to get in the gym and train, or you don't have the time or the resources to do it, my recommendation, wherever legal, get a weapon, learn how to use it, be prepared to use it, and be prepared to live with the consequences of using it.
Yeah, like one thing in addition is like, it's a human instinct, is fight or flight. So you either will fight or you run. And even if you think you know your techniques, if you've ever been really in that situation where you're threatened on the street or so, and you feel your adrenaline pumping up, then you will just figure out that it's a very different thing to watch some techniques or even train some techniques and really use them. So that's another thing, like just what you say, be prepared for that.
Yeah, I'd say it's a little bit more dynamic than just fight or flight even. I mean, that is an important step, but I would say it is fight and flight, but also we've got 2 other steps to that fight process. We've got posturing, and then we've got submission. And I don't just mean tapping out in jiu-jitsu type of submission. Submission happens a lot. Like that basically means freezing up and relenting and giving in to the attacker. And this happens to a lot of people. It even happens to big, tough, strong guys when they are confronted with a situation they're not familiar with. Like my very first professional kickboxing match, I came from a Taekwondo background. I felt pretty confident. I was good at the sport of Taekwondo. I felt like I was an accomplished athlete, and I got in the ring to do something very similar. This guy came up, punched me a few times, and it didn't really damage me. But what ended up happening, I kind of froze. I was like, this is different. There are like people and lights, and I'm fighting with my shirt off instead of with the dobok on, and shorts instead of pants, and it just feels weird. And I kind of froze a lot and ended up losing the decision in that fight. And I have a good friend in the US, and I was chatting with her online about self-defense one day, and she said, I think taking a self-defense class for me is a waste of time because I know what I would do if I was attacked. I would just freeze and I couldn't do anything. And that's an honest assessment. And I see this a lot in class, actually. Sometimes I'll have new students come in and we'll start to spar, even just lightly. We're not trying to hurt each other, but they'll kind of stop and they'll look over at me and say, I don't know what to do. And part of that is they're expecting to, they need to do it a certain way. They need to do a certain jujitsu technique by the book or whatever. But a big part of that is they just freeze because they realize they're out of their element. And they're in a new situation they've never been in before. Their muscle memory is not prepared to respond with movement. And so they freeze and they look for help. And that is a form of submission.
I've seen, talking about that, what I find very interesting, because that video is about women's self-defense, right? I've seen a very interesting experiment that they did on television where they had a couple of women and they trained them in some basic self-defense. But the first thing they did is they just went out on the street and they just played an attack. And they all froze. They just didn't know what to do. And then they trained them a little bit, but it wasn't so much about complicated techniques. I think there's even a difference from my experience, maybe that's the way that you grow up, if you're either a man or a woman. And women are often brought up in a more gentle way. So what they actually did, or what they taught them, was actually to be aggressive. So that instead of just freezing, was just have some aggression. And it was very interesting. They did exactly the same experiment with them again. They just put them out on the street. Then someone just randomly attacked them. It was very interesting because they just started to punch. They just been aggressive. And that was one of the ways that they could actually then have a moment to run away. But it was very interesting to see, especially with women, how it changes from being a victim to someone who's defending herself. And if it's just for a moment that she can run. I found this very interesting to see that.
That is fascinating. The one case in recent memory I remember thinking about that I hear, I can't talk today, forgot how to speak English. There was a woman who was attacked. She was a jogger. She liked to jog every day, and this guy started stalking her, followed her jogging path and hid out in a public restroom. And when she went in there, he jumped out and tackled her. But she'd taken a self-defense course previously. And instead of teaching techniques like this is how you escape a wrist guard, this is how you escape a bear hug or whatever, this class taught principles, specifically principles about aggression, principles about using hard weapons against soft targets and things like that, principles about using your voice and shouting and so on. And I think that's a much more effective way to train for self-defense, focus on principles instead of techniques, because as we showed in the sparring video, as soon as we said go, it all turned into a fight. There's clinching and punching and whatever, and there really wasn't time to think about, okay, which hand goes where on that wrist escape thing. It just turned into a brawl. And that's the reality. But it was a brawl based on principles of mixed martial arts techniques. So you saw striking and blocking and pummeling and takedowns and grappling and guard work and jiu-jitsu and whatnot. But if we lie to ourselves, if we deceive ourselves and say, if I watch a technique video on YouTube, I'm set. Or if I go to say a Krav Maga school or a self-defense school and we practice these self-defense techniques over and over again until we don't have to think about them anymore. I mean, I guess that's better than nothing, but at the same time, if we don't understand what a fight actually is, if we're not honest about that it's dynamic and it's unpredictable, well...
Yeah, plus what we just had here in China, where you also can find all those videos where mixed martial arts fighter or former MMA fighter who's not even the best MMA fighter.
Oh yeah, Xu
around,
Xiaodong. Yeah,
but he just
Xu Xiaodong. He fought like once back in what was it? Art of War Fighting Championship. I think he's got like 1 or 2 pro fights under his belt. He's retired now. He coaches full time. So he's not even a great MMA fighter, but he just kicked the crap out of that Tai Chi guy, and he kicked the crap out of that Wing Chun guy, even under the Wing Chun guy's rules.
Yeah, and then if you, this is actually what I learned from you, what you said is they just do not know what a fight is.
Yeah, and it's not because Xu Xiaodong is a great fighter. I mean, he's not. He's okay. You know, he's a tough guy. But the thing is, he knows what a fight is. He's been in fights before. He's fought before. He's fought full contact. He is familiar with that situation. And so when a Wing Chun guy comes up who's never been in a real fight before, you know, even though he throws all those pretty chain punches and whatnot, I mean, watch this video if you haven't. He lands a bunch of them.
But he's surprised.
Yeah, and our friend Mr. Shu just shrugs it off like, that tickles. My turn. Boom. Because again, one of these things is not like the other. Well, this is running a little long, guys, but hey, thanks for watching. If you have any questions or comments, leave them down below. Now get out there and train.